Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow, 1 month in? Two-thirds of New Yorkers agree with the protests. 87% agree or not, say let them continue. But the NYPD does it again.
This is not a war zone. This is not a war zone. These are unarmed people. It doesn't make you tough to hurt these people.
Nearly 200 arrested in Chicago. Thousands march in New York. Tens of thousands march in London. Hundreds of thousands march in Spain. And now, Occupy Wall Street plans an agenda, actual demands, actual preparations for mass arrests. There's an app for that. And it debates the Tom Hayden suggestion. Every person arrested exercises their right to a jury trial, clogging the courts. Occupy Day 31 with Tom Hayden and with Sergeant Shamar Thomas, U.S. Marine Corps.
I am from New York City, and these cops are hurting people that I fought to protect. There's no reason for this.
GOP chaos. Herman Cain says he was kidding about that border fence.
It's going to be 20 feet high. It's going to have barbed wire on the top. It's going to be electrified. And there's going to be a sign on the other side that says, "It will kill you."
Guess he was also kidding last year when he wrote, "The worst idea is a proposed national sales tax." And then he put a national sales tax in his 999 plan. Also, Herman sings.
Imagine there's no pizza.
Okay, Romney, Bachmann, Perry, Cain, who's next? All that and full coverage of Day 31 of Occupy Wall Street, now on Countdown.
You're lucky you have pizza.
Good evening from New York. This is Monday, October 17th, 386 days until the 2012 presidential election. And a month since the start of the Occupy Wall Street protests. They have spread from Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan in New York to Philadelphia to Denver to Sacramento, now to London, to Warsaw, to Taipei. The fifth story on the countdown, Occupy Wall Street has become Occupy the World, with marches Saturday in more than 900 cities outside this country. And if protesters needed any more inspiration to take to the streets, these latest financial reports from Citigroup and Wells Fargo today should help. Citigroup reporting third quarter profits of $3.8 billion, up 74% from 2010. Wells Fargo, third quarter profits, $4.1 billion, up 21% from last year. And while New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg and some members of the NYPD seem eager for Occupy Wall Street to leave Zuccotti Park, a new Quinnipiac poll shows New York City voters support the protests. 67% saying they agree with the protesters' views, 23% don't. Incredibly, 87% say it's okay that Occupy Wall Street is protesting, even the ones who disagree with their points. Just 10% say otherwise. The otherwise would include the New York Police Department, which keeps stepping on the rake of public relations. What it does not hit, it arrests, with CNET reporting a new Android app that can now send a quick message to a protester's friends, family, attorney in case of arrest. It would have been useful in New York City on Saturday. 24 protesters were arrested at a sit-in at a Citibank branch in Greenwich Village, some for doing no more than closing their accounts. Followed 42 more during a major rally in Times Square. Some protesters reportedly grabbed after they tried to push police barricades aside. 3 officers briefly treated for injuries, but to U.S. Marine Sergeant Shamar Thomas, who's fought in Iraq, the violence by police against unarmed demonstrators was indefensible.
Leave these people alone. They're U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens. U.S. It does not make you want to do this to them. It doesn't. Stop hurting these people, man. Why y'all do this to our people? I've been to Iraq 14 months. For my people, you come over here and hurt them. They don't have guns. They don't have guns. They don't. Why are you hurting these people? I was in Iraq with you. So why do you allow this? Why are they walking around trying to hurt people?
Sergeant Thomas will be our guest on this program in a few moments. After the confrontation in Times Square, more demonstrators gathered at New York's Washington Square Park. 14 more arrested there when they refused to observe a 1 a.m. curfew after the NYPD asked them, nicely, to leave.
I think we treated you with respect. We want to go home. Right? We understand the cause. We understand your voice. We understand what you're saying. But all we want is to vacate the park.
Plan on getting arrested? Sit down in there. If you don't, the park is closed. Time to go.
In Washington yesterday, Princeton professor Cornel West was one of 19 arrested on the steps of the Supreme Court while the Martin Luther King Memorial was being dedicated on the Mall. Professor West and the others charged with refusing to leave the court's grounds and demonstrating with signs. To the professor, it was all in the spirit of the day.
We will not allow this day of Martin Luther King Jr.'s memorial to go without somebody going to jail. Because Martin King would be here right with us.
Prosecutors dropped the charges against all 19 today, but struggles between police and protesters continued Sunday night in Chicago, where 175 demonstrators were handcuffed after they refused to down their tents and leave the city's Grant Park. And there were more than 40 arrests in Phoenix, again for violating a park curfew. Moving around the world, in London, 5 arrests Saturday in a protest that drew at least 3,000 marchers and has now settled down into a 4th day of occupation. At least 135 people injured in Rome after anarchists in black and right-wing soccer fans rioted during an Occupy protest, causing at least 5 million euros in damage. And elsewhere, 2,000 marched peacefully in Warsaw, Poland. No reports of arrests. 2,000 more, including unions and indigenous groups, protested in Sydney, Australia. Hundreds more took to the streets in Tokyo, Japan. And more than 100 marched in sympathy with Occupy Wall Street in Taiwan's capital, Taipei, chanting, "We are the 99% of Taiwan." The big domestic picture of Saturday First. Josh Harkinson is a reporter with Mother Jones magazine who was at both the Times Square and the Washington Square Occupy protests, and he's with us now. Thanks for your time tonight.
Good to be here, Keith.
What did you see at Times Square? Was there provocation by the protesters at any point that you saw?
Nothing major. I mean, I think there was some pushing of barricades back and forth. But I was told, there were times when the police were actually trying to push the barricades into the protesters. And so, the protesters started chanting, you step back. In response to what the cops have been telling them. So, I didn't see anything that was terrible, but, I wasn't in everywhere at once. And there were places,
yeah, who could be?
Yeah.
Was there some sense, though, in Times Square on a Saturday night, which was already a dangerously crowded place just with tourists and mimes and street artists and whatever else you have, that if you have a protest and then a police department that's got an itchy, not trigger finger, I don't want to use that term, but an itchy combat finger, that there's bound to be too many people and too little space to begin with.
Yeah, I really think it was a powder keg, and I'm surprised that something worse didn't happen. I mean, I think that the way that the crowd was hemmed in by all these barricades around Times Square, they were divided into separate places. It was kind of this divide and conquer approach, but it really frustrated the crowd because A, they couldn't get anywhere, and B, they all wanted to be together, and there just wasn't enough space for that.
Did you have any sense of what the tourists who fill this place now, the way it used to be empty 30 years ago? I mean, the amount of empty space is now one person per every available one-person unit. Is there any sense of what those passers-by thought of this?
Yeah, it was really funny. It was so crowded, I had nowhere to file my dispatches, so I found a broom closet in the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company. And the guy there was really nice. He's like, "Oh yeah, use my broom closet." Yeah. And so I went in there. It's just like this big, and I'm there with my laptop writing and tweeting, and this guy was really supportive, and all these tourists were kind of fleeing into there. But once they got in there, I started asking them what they thought, and I mean, none of them said anything negative. They're like, we're like totally with these guys.
Well, as the New York number would suggest, there's a 20-point difference between support and support of the right to protest, which is an extraordinary statistic, but it does tell you about what the mood is like here. Are you seeing a change in the protesters? What happened at Washington Square was, if you don't leave, it's time. The policemen sounded awfully reasonable in the tape that we used, and people still stayed and were deliberately arrested. Is now that becoming a tactic?
I don't know exactly what they're going to do going forward as far as arrests go. I think that's an item of debate among the people in the Occupy movement. I've been going to a lot of their meetings, and they kind of know that the more arrests there are, the more support they get. At least that's been the truth so far.
Unbelievably, it's true, yes.
But it's not fun getting arrested.
Yep.
And they, are trying to occupy Washington Square now, and that's kind of a different group of occupiers. So there's those variables.
I'm going to go into this in depth with Tom Hayden in the next segment, but what is it a fair statement to say that the leaders of this group, such as they are, amorphous and undecided as they may be about things, are beginning to come around to the idea that they want to organize at least their demands or goals for this entire movement?
I think it's a really contentious thing within the movement.
Yeah.
I mean, there is this what's called the Demands Working Group, which the New York Times wrote about today.
Right.
I was asking people, around Zuccotti about this, and a lot of them just didn't buy it at all. And they really want, to not have demands and instead to just kind of have a set of principles. But people have tried to come up with demands for this for, ever since it started. There have been like 2 to 3 attempts, and each time it's failed. So I think it's going to require more time, and it's just really not clear how it's going to shake out right now.
Josh Harkinson of Mother Jones, great, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
As you've seen throughout the month, it has been the unplanned and the unannounced which has been the fulcrum of every milestone in the Occupy movement. Saturday night, as a piece of tape we played earlier showed, when police clashed with protesters in Times Square, an American veteran of the war in Iraq stood up for the people behind the barricades.
Why are y'all walking like there's a war going on? Nobody has guns! I'm in New York City. I am from New York City, and these cops are hurting people that I fought to protect. There's no reason for this. There's no honor in hurting unarmed civilians, and I won't let it happen.
Sergeant Shamar Thomas is a Marine veteran, served 2 tours in Iraq, took part in Fallujah in the second battle. Comes from a military family. Both his parents are veterans. His father served in Afghanistan, his mother in Iraq. It's an honor to have you here, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Why'd you go to Times Square Saturday night, particularly wearing your medals and your uniform?
I initially went to the protest on October 5th, and I saw the police brutality, and it made me want to get involved even more to, the understanding that, we have young men and women out here who are trying to inspire, change. And so why wouldn't I want to be a part of that? So that's, my goal in life is to inspire a generation,
Well, obviously, because as I suggested, this was it was not Sergeant Thomas night on the schedule, and yet it sort of became that. What you were shouting in a way that you could see in the policemen's eyes they were listening and didn't know what to do, and there were people, passers-by didn't know what to do, and protesters didn't know what to do, because obviously you were hitting a chord with these people. What were you trying to say? And obviously we have the quotes, we have the tape, we played it, but what was in your mind as you were, expressing yourself in that vocal manner?
Well, I've been to Iraq twice. I've been in, I was in a riot in Rupa, Iraq in 2004, where we had rocks thrown at us, and after the rocks were thrown, we didn't go beating up people and arresting people. You know what I mean? We kind of treated it with a level of humility. You know what I mean? And to have the cops beating, I saw a cop punching a woman in the face. To see that in my own country, my family fought for this country for people to have a right, and these people are peaceful. I haven't seen a video yet where I've seen them try to hurt the cops. So why are they using batons and sticks? Why are they in riot gear when nobody's trying to riot,
Did you have a sense at the time that they were listening to you?
Oh, I know for sure they were listening to me. I have no doubt in my mind that they were listening to me. I had the fire in my gut, so to speak. Like they knew what I meant. I've been to on over 50 combat missions, so the intensity is there. They know that I'm telling the truth. They know in their hearts what I'm saying is right. With
good reason, in the last 10 years, particularly the New York Police Department has gotten a little militaristic in their point of view, because they now are trained that everything could be fatal, and that's probably a good attitude to have given what happened in 2001. There's an understanding of that, at least where it comes from. However, not every situation is fatal.
Exactly.
And it seemed like you were a cold bucket of water against their sort of fevered, what's going to happen now thing, because you actually been in the real thing where it was life and death, and this was not it. And that was what you were trying to get to them?
It's a time and place for things. It wasn't when the situation arises where the crowd starts getting frantic. That's when it's time to say, you know what, the crowd is getting frantic. When people are just shouting, we are the 99%, come join us. These are not, chants that incite violence, you know what I mean? So why, the riot police were in form, just walking, marching up and down the street like, like it was a battle going on, and I've been in battle. It was no battle going on.
The other side not only didn't have weapons of any kind, they didn't have the rocks yet. They're not
no rocks.
There's no stage at that point. Give me your assessment of the messages that are coming from Occupy Wall Street, and are you in favor of them, opposing the corporate greed and holding the banks accountable and supporting the middle class, principally those three?
I support everybody's view. I tell people all the time that I'm not a part of any political party. I'm not a part of any group or anything like that. I'm an American citizen.
Okay, so then what does this mean to you?
What this means to me is that this is our time in our generation to change the greed that is in America. Like both of my parents did 20 plus years in the military, and they have to find jobs now. And it's like I recruited for the Marines for 4 months, and it's like I taught kids to come join the Marines. So it's like, come join the Marines, and then what are you going to do after you get out of the Marines? You know what I mean? So it's like there's no place for us to go now. You know what I'm saying? So,
is there a place, you think, in Occupy, in the entire movement, in the protest movement that's beginning in this country, for veterans' rights, and particularly recent veterans' rights, to be addressed? Should there be some more attention paid to this fact?
Well, that's the whole thing with the uniform.
Sure.
That's what I tell people. Like, you know, I want to inspire the veterans to come out, because a lot of veterans have this thing where they don't want to speak against the government. They're so, trained, like, oh no, if I speak, speaking against the government is wrong. You know what I mean? Because we have a chain of command. But I don't think it's about a chain of command. It's about a way of life. You understand what I'm saying? So
chain of command goes both ways. Sergeant Shamar Thomas, U.S. Marine Corps, whose mother, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather also served this country through Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam and World War II.
Yes.
Great thanks to you for your service, to them for their service, and spectacular work on Saturday night.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming in here this evening.
Thank you.
Having accelerated and expanded faster than any other protest group in American history, Occupy Wall Street now addresses the prospect of maybe developing demands and goals and strategies like one suggested last week here by Tom Hayden. Mass, nonviolent arrests followed by each protester arrested demanding a jury trial, gumming up the system. Who better to follow up on that idea than Tom Hayden himself? He's next. This is Countdown.
It's going to be a casual thing.
You can afford. Call this number or go to SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote. We shop, you save.
It was one of the strategies for Occupy foreseen last week by our guest Tom Hayden. Now it's at least under consideration. Each protester arrested exercises their right to a jury trial, clog the courts. Tom Hayden elaborates next. The president referenced the protests yesterday. Liberals not only feel liberated by them, they think the administration may move to the left in the protests' wake. And new frontrunner, old problem. Now that he's out in front, people are examining his past, like how he used to fight against tougher drunk driving laws. And he has returned with a conspiracy theory good enough to stump the band. Mandatory singing of the Mexican national anthem. How dare they? In Spanish class. Worst person's ahead on Countdown. Occupy Wall Street, which at this rate will soon be known as Occupy Planet Earth, has grown at a phenomenal rate from Zuccotti Park in Manhattan to more than 900 cities in a month. That's outside this country. Now members of the movement are beginning to suggest it may need two more things: stated goals or demands to reflect its growing strength and are easy to remember, if not easy to define, and an operational strategy to grow the movement. Our fourth story on the Countdown: this all may shortly evolve into organized civil disobedience. Protesters at assemblies are struggling with what's next, forming working groups to formulate demands for specific actions from government, while including as many voices as possible. With mass arrests now becoming commonplace, one strategy for dealing with police and local governments may surface in the next few days: clogging the courts with cases. Or as the defense attorney Martin Stoller told the New York Daily News, "I'd like to suggest to the DA's office the appropriate way to deal with these cases is outright dismissal. The leverage is we take them all to trial." Civil rights and anti-war activist Tom Hayden knows as much about formulating strategies for change as anybody in America today. And thanks for coming back on the program so soon, sir.
Glad to be here.
When you were on last Wednesday, you suggested one strategy would be, and I'll quote what you said, 10,000 or 20,000 people sat down in the streets of New York and said, if you don't do anything about Wall Street, arrest us. Do you get the impression that the protesters are either taking that advice or have arrived at sort of the same conclusion that you had?
No, I was making a prediction about a scenario, not giving advice. I don't know what will happen. As a practical matter, about 2,000 people have been arrested around the country. And the pattern that we see is that the protesters are trying, for the most part, to avoid arrests, and the politicians and police are trying to avoid confrontations. A reason for that, a practical reason, is if you hold on to a park for protest, for occupation, and as a launching pad for marches. You don't want to give it up to be arrested if you can help it. But at some point, something's going to give, and it's predictable that it'll go in the direction of civil disobedience unless there's a political solution, which I don't see on the horizon. Do you?
No, I think you're correct about that. But so walk me through the next stage of this, and I think people who even know an elemental history of Gandhi knew that he did this in 2 different countries. Play out the scenario. The courts get clogged to whatever degree clogging is possible, which I would think would be easier now than ever before. What happens after that?
Well, I don't think that these occupiers want to get arrested. That's what's different.
Right.
And I don't think the police necessarily want to arrest them. If you look at Wisconsin, the firefighters and the police joined in the demonstrations. So that's the possibility here that's totally unique. But if nothing happens, I think it's gradually going to be predictable that the police are going to be ordered to move in. Then the question is, you know, what do you do? If it descends into just street fighting, it becomes a replay of Chicago 68 and the late 60s Law and Order. If there's enough people and they all sit down and say, we want to appeal to a jury of our peers, which is our constitutional right, that's something that should make the decision makers take pause, because I don't think juries are going to convict these people. And I don't think the judiciary has the capacity to deal with it.
There's still, as I think you noted there, seems to be a lot of public surprise that A, protesters are being arrested, even though, as you suggest, they seem reluctant, and B, the police, although they seem reluctant, are arresting them. Have we lost that protest reflex? I mean, I thought it was that as long as it was nonviolent, weren't you supposed to get arrested at a protest?
Well, that's the get arrested and go to jail for 24 hours and get out. But this is about occupying a park or occupying public space. So you got to be careful if you're a protester. If you get arrested, you lose the space, you lose the launching pad, you get some imagery on television, then the bail costs mount. So I think this is different, and I don't think that the police necessarily want to do this. I could be wrong on that. Every city is different, but the politicians generally don't want the police to do this, and they don't know what the alternative is. So it's a standoff, and it gives an opportunity for the message about Wall Street to be heard. And the occupations are launching pads for demonstrations at Wall Street fat cats' homes. All that enhances the message. But if it comes to a non-resolution, the police will probably be sent in, and then people have to decide collectively, what do they want to do? What is it? And the Gandhian option, I think, will be there.
How extreme.
And I think decision makers should know that they may face a very difficult emperor has no clothes kind of problem if they really have to arrest 50,000 people. So that should make people try to solve this problem before it comes to that.
We'll see if it works this time with negotiation. The activist, author, and educator Tom Hayden, and once again, a great pleasure, sir.
Keith, thank you.
The president said he wanted to be pushed from the left. He's gotten his wish and then some. Occupy Wall Street's burgeoning political clout. Next. A month into the Occupy Wall Street movement, and protesters might already be able to claim a political victory, energizing the left and giving the president the impetus to push a more progressive agenda. In our third story tonight, congressional Democrats praising the president for new, bold language, much of it sounding strikingly similar to the Occupy Wall Street protesters' language. Today in North Carolina, the president pushing his jobs plan and criticizing Republicans for their extreme agenda.
They want to gut regulations. They want to let Wall Street do whatever it wants. They want to drill more, and they want to repeal health care reform. That's their jobs plan.
President Obama also signaling he may be done trying to compromise with Republicans.
I don't think anybody doubts that I have gone out of my way to try to find areas of cooperation with these Republicans.
His chief strategist, David Axelrod, also channeling some Occupy Wall Street concerns yesterday on ABC's This Week.
The American people want a financial system that works on the level. They want to get a fair shake.
Democratic lawmakers who were critical of the president for trying too hard to appeal to centrists during the 2010 elections and thereafter are now lining up behind him. Representative Raul Grijalva, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, who earlier this year said Obama threw progressives under the bus in the debt ceiling debate, now praising the president for his strong words. He told The Hill today, for those of us that have been taking those positions for a long time, it is a confidence booster, and I think that makes us a little more assertive. Representative Luis Gutierrez, the Democrat of Illinois, giving Occupy Wall Street credit for the party's renewed energy. We're coming together. Maybe the protesters unified the Democratic Party. With Democrats emboldened by the protests, Republicans are now trying to steer criticism back toward the White House. House Majority Leader Cantor, who a week ago called the protesters mobs, now simply saying they're misguided, arguing on Fox that they should direct their iron not at Wall Street but at Washington, well, at the Democratic Party.
I mean, when you hear some of the Democratic elected leaders joining in, blaming parts of our economy and society versus let's take some of the credit or blame here in Washington.
Joining me now, Senator Bernie Sanders, the Independent of Vermont. Thanks again for your time, sir.
Good to be with you, Keith.
So 1 month in, whatever else it has or has not done, is it fair to say Occupy Wall Street has succeeded in turning liberals into liberals?
Well, I'm a progressive, so
yes,
maybe progressives into progressives. I think what they have done, which deserves a whole lot of credit and respect, is they are focusing attention on the most powerful, secretive, and dangerous entity in the United States of America, and that is Wall Street. And I think, Keith, if you go any place in America, you find people outraged that the crooks on Wall Street who caused this terrible, terrible recession, so much unemployment, people losing their life savings, people losing their homes, and meanwhile the guys on Wall Street today, after we bailed them out, they're doing just great. And most Americans don't think that's right.
The president specifically, do you think he's seen the light or he's been enabled to see the light that he always knew was there?
Well, I don't know. I think maybe some of his advisors are showing him some polls out there which say very clearly that when you stand up for working people and you say we have got to create millions of jobs, rebuilding our infrastructure, rebuilding our schools, you know what? That is exactly what the American people want. And when you stand up and you say, in the midst of a horrible recession, when Social Security has a $2.5 trillion surplus and can pay out every benefit for the next 25 years, no, we are not going to cut Social Security. We're not going to raise the eligibility age of Medicare. We're going to defend those life and death programs. So I think what the president is catching on to is that the American people want him to stand up tall and straight on behalf of working families who are struggling desperately today and take on the big money interests who are so powerful and the wealthiest people who are doing phenomenally well.
Does this translate into legislation? Does this enable Congress to pass, say, the jobs bill bit by bit, do you think?
I would, if I were a Republican talking about more Wall Street deregulation after Wall Street has caused this recession, if I were a Republican ignoring the fact that we have 25 million Americans unemployed or underemployed, you know what? I would be getting a little bit nervous about going home to my district. So I would hope that some of these Republicans are waking up and say, yeah, we need a jobs program. Keith, it is beyond my comprehension how anybody in the United States Congress does not understand that our infrastructure, roads, bridges, water systems, rail, public transportation, all of it crumbling and in desperate need of repair. We can create millions of jobs doing that. I don't understand how you cannot be supportive of that effort.
Do you have in a big political sense that the endurance of the protesters on Wall Street and elsewhere in this country has shifted the old Overton window, as they call it? Are the parameters of American politics suddenly not just center and right, but actually have a right, a center, and a left again in a matter of 1 month's time?
I think that that's right. And I think when you look at polls which tell you that people are much more sympathetic to the Wall Street demonstrators' point of view than they are, for example, to the Tea Party, that tells you something. And it's not only the greed and recklessness of Wall Street. The other important issue that the demonstrators have been raising is both the moral and economic aspects of a grossly unequal distribution of wealth and income. So when you have the 400 wealthiest people owning more wealth than the bottom half of America, 150 million Americans, you know what? Most Americans will say, that ain't right, that's wrong. We got to address the issue of the rich getting richer and everybody else getting poorer.
So I haven't asked you this in all the times that we've done interviews since this started in the last month. As a progressive, as perhaps the leading progressive, certainly in office in this country, how do you feel about this personally, to see this playing out on the streets in this way for the last month?
I feel very, very good, very positive and very proud of what the issues that these demonstrators are raising.
I'm glad.
And I think it's going to have a real impact on this country, and I applaud them for their efforts.
I'm glad to hear that you feel that way, and I hope that I think the pride on your part is particularly deserved. The great independent of Vermont, Senator Bernie Sanders, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
And then there are the Republicans, now lost in a pro-corporate, anti-minority haze, led by a Romney advisor insisting that women are no longer discriminated against, and Herman Cain touting a federal sales tax, the essence of his 999 plan. When it turns out that this time last year he was writing that the worst idea we could ever implement would be a federal sales tax. Coming up on Countdown.
They called it unfit for civilian.
Dumont's presentation of Captain Video and his Video Rangers will not be seen tonight, so we can instead bring you Countdown. It is live weeknights here at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific. Our primary replays are at 11 p.m. Eastern and 11 p.m. Pacific. We call it Our Little Miracle. Herman Cain sings John Lennon's immortal song, Imagine, with pizza lyrics. Imagine there's no pizza. Imagine there's no Herman Cain. Soon. First, the sanity break, and on this date, 1954, Adrian Burke of the Philadelphia Eagles became only the second quarterback to throw 7 touchdowns in one game in a 49-21 win at Washington. Fame, though, is fleeting. He would throw only 20 more touchdowns in his career. So Burke turned to officiating, and he was the back judge in the game of September 28, 1969 between Minnesota and Baltimore, when Minnesota quarterback Joe Kapp became the last quarterback to throw 7 touchdowns in one game. Time marches on. We begin on the internets, where Blondie seems to have found herself in a compromising position. At least she has some cheese powder to sustain her while she tries to get out. Though she doesn't seem to be rationing it very well. With manners like these, who would ever want to hang out with her? Well, there's somebody. Blondie, meet Gray Gray. 1 tub of ice cream, 1 tub of cheese balls, and I think you guys will get along very well. And they say cats and dogs have nothing in common. Pittsburgh, where it's World Zombie Day, as if you didn't know that already. With so many old and decaying people wandering mindlessly, you'd think you're at the GOP convention. We come to eat your brains. Participants said they had a fun time, but eventually everybody left, and the party frankly felt a little bit dead. Finally, we travel to Pennsylvania, where this cell phone store has a new customer. That's right, the buck stops here. After a brief trip to the bathroom to powder his antlers, oops, hope you didn't need that, the deer makes his way out of the store. Santa says this is the last damn time he's having the reindeer do the shopping for him. Time marches on. Rick Perry's son quits his job at an investment bank to go campaign for Dad, so naturally Mrs. Rick Perry claims her son lost his job because of the Obama administration. Worst person's coming up on Countdown. Headlines of import this Monday night. To quote National Journal, America's involvement in Iraq is ending with a whimper, not a bang, with Iraq's parliament unable to agree on a proposal to continue immunity from prosecution for the 43,000 U.S. troops there. They will apparently be rushing for the exits in the next 6 weeks, leaving the American contingent in Iraq at 150 Marines to guard the embassy in Baghdad. The message we're getting is, a senior military official told that publication, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Rush Limbaugh is under attack from many in the right wing after he defended a murderous Ugandan gang that calls itself the Lord's Resistance Army on his radio show. President Obama sent 100 military advisors to Central Africa to fight that group. Limbaugh said Lord's Resistance Army are Christians. It means God. But even the conservative Eric Erickson wrote, quote, the group has notoriously gone through Uganda, capturing children and turning them into soldiers, and when not successful, murdering them. The group engages in sex trafficking, slavery, murder, mutilation. There's been no comment from Limbaugh. Herman Cain advocating a national sales tax a year after he's saying it was the worst idea possible, and worst persons next on Countdown. So Herman Cain was just joking when he called for an electrified border fence with which to kill illegal immigrants. Guess he was also joking last year when he wrote that the worst thing possible was a national sales tax just before he put it in his infamous 999 tax plan. Next. First, because neither bullcrap plans nor juiced fences can keep these Nosferatus out, it's time for Countdown's nominees for today's top 3 worst persons in the world. The bronze to Tom Leppert, would-be nominee for Senate from Texas. He has launched his first political campaign centered on opposition to Occupy Wall Street. First one in the country. The Occupy Wall Street crowd represents the same flawed values that got our country into this economic mess, reads his website. There's a petition, naturally. We will be sending the petition to President Obama, calling on him to denounce the angry Occupy mob. Turns out Mr. Leppert was the chairman of the audit committee at Washington Mutual Bank just before it blowed up and lost $63 billion in investors' money and got sold to Chase for a pittance. And then we had to go and bail out Chase to the tune of $25 billion. So if anybody knows about the same flawed values that got our country into this economic mess, it's Tom Leppert, because it looks like he invented most of them. The runner-up, Anita Perry, wife of one-time presidential candidate Rick Perry. Now we know why she married him. He's actually smarter than she is. Their son, Griffin, graduated from college 5 years ago, went to work at Deutsche Bank as an investment banker. Then the Securities and Exchange Commission ruled that you couldn't be an investment banker and have a significant role in a political campaign. How does this rather straightforward, common-sense plan seem through the misty fog of stupidity to Mrs. Perry? My son lost his job because of this administration. Apparently the Perry family belongs to the I'm mad because I don't get everything I want party. But the winner, Lonesome Rhodes Beck, having lost 90% of his TV audience when he switched to subscriptions, he's now reduced largely to a website. It's called The Blaze, and it's hilarious. It has an exclusive today. Blaze exclusive. Texas high school students made to recite Mexican national anthem, Pledge of Allegiance. Dun da da da! Students in a Texas public high school were made to stand up and recite the Mexican national anthem and Mexican Pledge of Allegiance as part of a Spanish class assignment, but the school district maintains there was nothing wrong with the lesson. Was it a sophomore language class? Was it Spanish class, where they tend to recite stuff and sing easy-to-remember songs in, Spanish? But of course, if you're an ethnic and racial bigot like Glenn Beck and the helots who work for him, this becomes a plot to undermine the country and make it possible for Mexico to retake the Alamo or drive down the price of gold or something. You know what? They're standing and singing in French class, don't you, Glenn? The Marseillaise, the French national anthem. You know where the Marseillaise started? In the French Revolution, Glenn. You know what they had in the French Revolution, don't you, Glenn? Guillotines, guillotines. We are this close to guillotines in public school French class. This close! It always ends that way. Lonesome Rhodes Beck, conspiracy theorist, and goober, today's worst person in the world. Yet another Republican frontrunner has begun to melt under the hot glare of attention. And our number one story in the countdown, it is almost formulaic now. Previous unvetted frontrunner gets caught on tape having turned 180 degrees from a liberal stance he or she formerly held, or an embarrassing piece of old video surfaces, or an embarrassing piece of lobbying or advocacy, or he or she proposes something too radical, even for the radical right, and tries to back away, insisting it was just a joke. Or in Mr. Cain's case, all of the above in one weekend. The 180 first. Last Thanksgiving, he wrote a column about debt reduction concepts, posted at a series of leading right-wing sites. The worst idea is a proposed national sales tax, which is a disguised VAT, value-added tax on top of everything we already pay in federal taxes. 12 months later, a national sales tax is the third 9 in Cain's 999 tax plan. A Cain spokesman told BusinessInsider.com that what Cain wrote last year was one line taken out of context, so the publication responded with more context. The second of his reasons to oppose a national sales tax, that no matter how low you set it, say 9%, it could still be raised again later. In every country that has established a VAT with the promise of reducing its national debt, the VAT has eventually gone up or expanded on top of the existing tax structure. It would be real easy for an overzealous bureaucrat to insert the language in the legislation, national retail and wholesale tax. So Mr. Cain was opposed to the 999 plan before he was for it. Then there was yesterday's assertion that he didn't really mean the following about an electrified border fence to keep out illegal immigrants.
We're going to have a fence. It's going to be 20 feet high. It's going to have barbed wire on the top. It's going to be electrified. And there's going to be a sign on the other side that says, "It will kill you."
That Mr. Kane was serious about that was underscored when critics came back at him immediately with the charge that the idea of electrocuting people trying to get into the country was insensitive. And he replied immediately, "It's insensitive for them to be killing our citizens, killing our border agents. That's what's insensitive, and that mess has to stop." But by yesterday, when the monstrosity of his idea had become apparent nationally, suddenly Kane claimed he was kidding, and it was everybody else's fault that they didn't know that.
That's a joke, David.
It's a joke. So
that's a joke. That's a joke.
That's not a serious plan.
That's not a serious plan. No, it's not.
You got a big laugh at that, but that's not what you do.
That's a joke. I've also said America needs to get a sense of humor.
It was such a joke that today the Texas state head of the largest Hispanic GOP group, Somos Republicans, not only quit that organization in protest, he quit the Republican Party after a lifetime in it. Where is Republican leadership, writes Olaro Antonio Garza in a statement. Where has the guiding principle of morality gone? If the Republican Party cannot or will not rebuke this hateful bigot and others like him who wear the mantle of Republican, then perhaps the time has come for a rebuke of the party itself. Maybe Mr. Kane was also just joking in 1996 when he defended drunk driving, arguing that the blood alcohol level should be kept at 0.10, not lowered to 0.08. Back when he lobbied for the National Restaurant Association, Kane tried to make it easier for people to drive drunk. He argued that the blood alcohol level for drunk driving should be 0.10 instead of going down. Kane wrote, "The problem is not the responsible drinker, it is the alcohol abuser. 2/3 of all the alcohol-related fatalities are caused by drivers with a BAC of 0.15 or higher." And lastly, there is the sudden appearance of an ancient, embarrassing piece of videotape such as this one.
Imagine there's no pizza. I couldn't if I tried. Eating only tacos or Kentucky Fried.
Ken Vogel tracks the Republican candidates for Politico and gets to follow that musical number with which we've opened the show. Ken, good evening.
Hey, great to be with you, Keith.
Am I wrong to suggest that there's been a certain lack of vetting by Republicans of Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just Republicans, it's the media. This guy has managed to coax with very little in-depth media scrutiny to this point, to the top of the polls. And what you're seeing now is this belated, some would say overdue vetting and scrutiny by the media, where they're looking into his past statements. And you don't have to go too far back. Granted, the video was from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but the statement from, about opposing the flat tax was from a year ago or less than a year ago. So, the media has in some ways dropped the ball, but you can kind of see why it might not be something that they would devote a lot of attention to, vetting this candidate who looked like he had no chance of, being at the top of the polls for a day, let alone a week this late in the primary process. Then on the flip side, you have the Republican primary voters who to this point haven't really seemed to care, as the polls indicate. He's had a series of these gaffes. Now they're getting more attention, though, and now they're hitting very close to the centerpiece, actually at the centerpiece of his campaign platform, this 999 plan. So I think it's going to be tougher for him to laugh off these types of contradictions and sort of scrutiny that he's getting.
Speaking of laughs, the fence, if that was a joke, as he suggested to David Gregory yesterday, why did he defend it right after the speech and not say that was a joke, moron?
Well, it's a question that both opponents of the fence, like the gentleman that you mentioned who dropped out of the GOP entirely because of Kane voicing this position, as well as supporters of the fence, like Michelle Bachmann, his opponent for the GOP nomination, are not buying. They are taking it seriously, and they are criticizing him for it. We should note, however, that Michelle Bachmann also explained her suggestion that the earthquake and Hurricane Irene, which did in fact kill many individuals, saying that was a way for God to wake up the politicians in Washington. She explained that as a joke, so maybe she's not the best arbiter of this. But these explanations from Kane for his gaffes, whether saying something was taken out of context, like his spokesman tried to do with his opposition to the flat tax, or saying that something was a joke, or saying that he simply wasn't briefed on something like he did after he stumbled over a question on Palestinian right of return the day after he declared his candidacy. Those are no longer going to cut it.
So is what happened to Perry and Bachmann when they kind of went through this post-leadership vetting issue when vetting is supposed to be pre-leadership. Is that instructive as to what's likely to happen to Kaine now? Is he going to, people suddenly going to back away and go, well, guess what? The other joke in this equation was our support for you.
I think there's a strong possibility of that, Keith. These Republican primary voters are going to have to start asking themselves the question, who is going to be able to stand toe-to-toe with President Obama? And while they may think that his candor, Herman Cain's candor, his ability to laugh off mistakes or to admit that he didn't know something is refreshing and not typical of sort of a standard issue politician, at some point they're going to have to ask themselves, do we want refreshing or do we want a viable candidate? And I think when they start asking themselves, is Herman Cain the most viable candidate, they're probably going to come to the conclusion that no, he's not.
And briefly on Romney's judicial advisor, Robert Bork, suggesting that women aren't discriminated against anymore. Mr. Bork's managed now to be in a controversy in 5 different decades. Mr. Romney's hope really was basically to fly low and watch everybody else self-destruct. Does he have to do something about Bork?
Well, so far he hasn't. I emailed him and just checked my email a few moments ago, and there was no response on this Bork issue. The comments are potentially problematic. With Bork, as you suggested, there's a trade-off. He appeals to the conservative base. However, that you run the risk of offending folks in the center, including, as he noted, women who are more than 50% of the population and play an inordinate role in elections. You know, Romney, with all these things, he's got to ask himself, is this Rose Garden strategy that he is currently using, where he has managed to avoid some of the cut and thrust of the daily campaign and hasn't answered questions about his campaign or his past, is that going to be the tack that he takes here, or is he going to be forced to respond?
And it's nice to mention Bork again to remind everybody that Bork was the man who fired Archibald Cox. Ken Vogel of Politico, always a pleasure, Ken. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's Countdown for Monday, 386 days till the 2012 presidential election. I'm Keith Olbermann. Give yourself a round of applause for getting through another day of this crap. Good night and good luck.